The kingdom remained divided till 1948. That's when Israel and the 10 tribes came together in the northern area, the Galilee and Samaria became part of Israel again, along with the southern portion. It's been that long. 2 kingdoms. So from now on, as we study Israel, when we say Israel, we will be talking specifically about the northern 10 tribes. And when we talk about Judah, we'll be talking about the area of Jerusalem and surrounding Jerusalem. 2 separate kingdoms that were at war with each other quite a bit. Now, what happened to Jerry up in the north? Well, for the sake of time, we won't go through reading all of this. I encourage you to read it on your own. But here's what Jerry does. He's anointed king, and he begins to build and establish his kingdom. And he sees that there's a religious problem. Jerusalem, where this new awesome temple is, where everyone is supposed to go at least 3 times a year to celebrate the 3 primary feasts, it's not in his territory. It's down in Jerusalem. Jerry's up north, Ray's down south. And Jerry says, I got to do something about this. He begins to build up his capital and so forth, but he says, this is going to be a problem because the people are going to go down to Jerusalem for the feast, and they're going to go, man, this is really nice down here. You know, why don't we get together again? Why can't we all just be friends? Why can't we all just be one big happy family again? So he says, this is what I will do. And it says that he, let's pick it up in, let me find it here. Verse 25. Jeroboam built Shechem in the mountains of Ephraim and dwelt there, and he went out from there and built Penuel. Then Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom may return to the house of David if these people go up and offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem. The heart of this people will turn back to their lord Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they'll kill me and go back to Rehoboam, king of Judah. Therefore the king asked advice, made 2 calves of gold, and said to the people, it's too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, which brought you up from the land of Egypt. And he set up one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. And now this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one as far as Dan. Now, if you look on a map, you'll find that Dan was the northernmost city in the kingdom of Israel. Bethel was down near the southern border with Judah. So basically, he set up 2 centers of worship so that you didn't have to, no matter where you lived, you didn't have to leave the nation of Israel in order to worship. You didn't have to go down to Jerusalem. And you notice what he said? He said, these are your gods who brought you out of Egypt. He didn't say, let's start a new religion, which is what he was doing. And we find in the story that he appointed everybody who wanted to be a priest, could be a priest. It was no longer the house of Levi. It was no longer the sons of Aaron, but just anybody could be a priest. These are your gods who brought you out of Egypt, he says. This is Yahweh. This is the Lord, he's saying. Wow. Reminds me of Romans 1:21. It says, although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image, made like corruptible man and birds and 4-footed animals and creepy things. And Jeroboam's legacy was that every other king in Israel did the same thing. These golden calves remained until the northern kingdom was overrun by the Assyrians hundreds of years later. And you will find in the account of every one of the northern kings, it will say, he did this, he did that, and it will always say, and he continued in the sin of Jeroboam. He set up idolatry, and they just went whole hog, full force into it. And as we read through the history of the northern kingdom, we will find that is the place. Now, chapter 13, a man of God comes and condemns him and prophesies that it will be torn down. And we'll actually take a look at that next week, because it's real interesting about this prophet who comes and what happens to him. And in chapter 14, there's a story of the fact that Jeroboam's son becomes ill. And what does he do? He has his wife sneak down to Shiloh to see Ahijah the prophet. He doesn't go and talk to the golden calves. Jeroboam knew his religion was a sham. He knew it was just a religious facade. When he needed something, he went to find a prophet of God. And so his wife disguised herself and went in, and before she could even say, here's what the problem is. He said, I know who you are. You're the wife of Jeroboam, and I know your son's ill, and he's going to die. And God is going to judge Jeroboam. I told him if he would walk in my ways, I would establish his dynasty, but his house will not be established. Will not be. And that is prophesied. Prophet tells her the son will die. And he did as soon as she got home. So we find these two kings seeking counsel. It's a good thing to seek counsel. It says in the multitude of counselors there's safety. It's wise to seek counsel, the book of Proverbs tells us. But there's a very important question to ask yourself. Where do you seek counsel? Who is your counselor? Jesus told his disciples, and us through them, at the Last Supper, that he would send another counselor. He would send another one who would come alongside, the Paraclete, the one who would counsel us, be our counselor, who would lead us into all truth, who would be the one who would bring the inspiration to those who wrote these words on these pages that we look at every Sunday. David told us, hey, look, you're going to be blessed if you forget about what the ungodly are giving you as counsel, but instead you delight yourself. You delight yourself in what God's Word says. And that's where your thinking is. That's what you want to put into place. Wicked like the chaff scattered by the wind. The path of the wicked leads to destruction. And Ray and Jerry found exactly that. Their lives were not good. Their kingdoms were not secure. Ray, after 5 years in, was overrun by Egypt. And all of the golden things we talked about a couple of weeks ago, those golden shields that were hung up in the hall of judgment and so forth, carried off to Egypt. He had bronze ones made to be put up in their place. All of that was carried away 5 years in. Why? Because he had turned from the Lord. His father, the wisest man, had followed the counsel of the ungodly, his wives, and had sought to build temples of idolatry on their advice because that's what they wanted. Ray wanted to rule by coercion. I will make you. My little finger is bigger than my dad's waist was. I will whip you with scourging. Literally, that means scorpions. Jerry wanted to rule by diversion. Hey, we'll divert you to some other religion where God doesn't get in the way of what I want to do. But Jesus calls leaders to be servants. He calls you and I to be servants.